Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Fain, CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence, and here in my capacity as an ambassador to the International Mentoring Association board for the continuation of our series of interviews with mentoring experts. And I'm thrilled today to be here with Dr. Noro Andramanalia, who is the Director of Academic and Professional Development for the Graduate School at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. She leads and oversees strategic initiatives to support graduate students across disciplines. She conducts research and has published on the writing experiences and career paths of Indigenous and doctoral students of color. And she develops curriculum to train faculty and staff on creating a more inclusive campus climate. She has 20 years of professional experience in higher ed as an administrator and an instructor, both at the undergrad and graduate levels. And she's been at University of Minnesota in other positions, including as Director of Academic and Professional Development for the Graduate School Diversity Office, Associate Director of the President's Distinguished Faculty Program, and Associate Director of the Multicultural Undergraduate Summer Research Program. She's served in various capacities at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. She's earned her bachelor's degree in English and Religion from Augsburg College. I was just there in March, very exciting for the Forum on Workplace Inclusion, which was wonderful. And a Master of Arts in Teaching English from Minnesota State University at Mankato, and a doctoral degree in Educational Policy and Administration from the University of Minnesota. Noro, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Excited to have you here, and we have much to talk about. I'd like to first ask you a little bit about strategic mentoring. You talk about strategic mentoring a lot, and I'd like to know what that is and why you think it's so important.
Sure. So strategic mentoring to me means having thoughtful, well-planned mentoring program where there are expected expectations from the mentor and the mentee in terms of outcomes. How will this mentoring opportunity benefit the mentee? What is the role of the mentee? What is the role of the mentor? What is considered success from having this relationship take place? And the reason strategic mentoring is important is I've run different types of mentoring programs in my career, both informal mentoring and formal mentoring. And I have found that if you make it clear from the very beginning what should be the ideal situation in terms of at the end of the relationship, what are some skills that the mentee should gain, what kind of expertise would be needed from the mentor, there is this sense of open communication between the mentor and the mentee. The mentee is empowered to really express the areas that they want to grow. We use a tool called Individual Development Plan, IDP, that Minnesota created several years ago to help in that strategy of mentoring, where mentees are encouraged and guided by the mentor to identify areas that they want to develop, what we call transferable skills, skills that the mentee would need regardless of where they go with their career. And once the mentee is empowered to identify areas they want to grow, then they can think for themselves. They tend to know already how they want to approach identifying goals and strategies for meeting their goals in those areas that they want to develop. Then they bring that plan to a mentor and say, here's sort of what I'm thinking about how I can grow myself in these three top areas. Could be writing, it could be communication, for example, or job search, what have you. And then the mentor looks at that and says, you know, I do have some expertise in some of these areas. In this area, I might refer to somebody else who might be a better guide for you in that area. But the idea is that there is this collaborative process in the strategy of helping this mentee grow. So without that explicit expectation of what is to happen in a mentoring relationship, I see sometimes mentees don't feel that they have the right to ask for more because they feel like they're being rude, and a lot of this is cultural too. Students or individuals who come from cultures where you are not raised to ask for something they stay quiet, and then they're not really growing. But if there is expectation that you do have the right to ask for something that you're not getting, you ask for information, for expertise, then there is more interaction, more engagement. And that's the strategic part of it, is that there is an expectation that one person does this and the other person does that, and there's open communication.
Yeah, I love that you say that. You know, one of the things that I find people resist a lot is this idea of formality in a mentoring relationship. They find that maybe it's artificial, maybe it feels disingenuous, or maybe it feels, as you point out, counter to some of our own cultural familiarity with authority and that kind of thing. And so having having the structure of this IDP is almost like permission in a
Yes.
way,
Yes.
right? That can help I wouldn't even say overcome the cultural conditioning, because that's not what we're trying to do, but have it align with the cultural conditioning, right? To be able to still have that growth. You know, you and I had a little conversation before I hit record that captured something that was beautiful that I just want to ask you about again. And that's not just what the IDP does for the mentee, but what is the advantage of the IDP for the mentor?
Right, yep. So the mentor can have a more informed conversation with the mentee about what the mentee is really expecting, and be a better mentor, in that if they feel that they're not an expert in an area that the mentee is seeking to develop. So for example, at the university, we have graduate students, for example, who are not interested in becoming faculty. They want to do something else with their PhD. So they may want to work for industry or nonprofit. Well, if you are a faculty at the university and you don't have experience working in industry or nonprofit, you may not be the best person to help your mentee develop those skills or make those connections. So the mentor at that point, without feeling helpless, like, well, there's really nothing I can do here, can think about, well, I do know of resources that could help you connect to individuals outside of the academy where you could get those skills and advice. So the mentor in that way can feel helpful because they see on paper, they see in the plan what the student is trying to accomplish, and then help the student, position the student to be able to get that knowledge and expertise without feeling helpless. Like, well, there's nothing I can do, you know, go somewhere else, right? And you feel like you're not being a really good mentor. But what I tell people is that a mentor is being able to assess your limitations. You don't have to know everything. That's impossible. You know, as human beings, we can't know everything. So you can say, I understand here's an area that you really are interested in. I may not be the best person to help you in this area, but I do know some people, there are some resources that could help you, that I could direct you to. So the mentor in that way still feels empowered to be able to help the mentee without having the actual direct expertise that the mentee needs. And that to me is important, because then the mentoring relationship is still intact. Right? The mentor is not just copping out and saying, well, you know, I can't help you, I'm out, you know, go somewhere else. But basically, you know, after they're looking at the plan, and depending on how detailed the mentee's plan is, the mentor can look at it and say, oh, okay, so from what I'm understanding here, you're looking to gain these skills. Now here I can help you, and here is where I can send you to get these skills and expertise from someone. So in that way, the mentee doesn't look at the mentor like, well, they're just passing me off to somebody else. You know, they really are interested in my development and is helping me connect to resources, instead of just being disengaged because they can't help with a certain area. So it's beneficial to the mentor to continue to feel connected to the mentee, because the plan is laid out, and the mentor can look at that and guide themselves which direction they'll guide the mentee, to make sure that even if they directly can't assist, they are still able to push that mentee forward.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that strikes me is that sometimes what I'll see with mentors is that they make there's this implicit assumption that their mentees want what they've got, right? And the IDP is such a beautiful thing because right off the bat, it checks that assumption. Is maybe your path isn't my path, and certainly your path is never going to be my path, right? Because it came at a different time. And I just love that it takes that, it sort of checks that assumption right off the bat so that you can remove that and really get to something that's unique to what the mentee's own goals are. What sort of difference have you seen strategic mentoring and the IDP make in some of the mentors and mentees journeys?
Sure. So the IDP is a communication tool. So if you and I were in a mentoring relationship, and if no one helped us think about what to discuss in our meetings, where might, we grow, you'd end up talking about the weather and fishing and hobbies and things, and hope at some point you connect on, okay, so what does the mentee need, right? With the IDP, there isn't this sort of awkward, vague conversations about what the mentee needs. It's clear from the very beginning that here are areas that the mentee already identified for themselves. So it's really about assessing and empowering the mentee to think for themselves, and they can pretty much develop the IDP with strategies in mind of how they might get some of the goals that they want, right? Students are not these empty, vessels or cells where they don't have any ideas of what they need or what they want. They do, we just haven't asked them. So the IDP is a way for us to ask them, like, where do you need to grow and how to envision doing so and who can help you? So it's very clear at the very beginning that they are already taking charge of their own development, academic and professional development. You just need to nudge them and identify people in their network to help them get to those goals. So without that, I can't really imagine how you would have the conversation with somebody about really thoughtful steps to get the mentee to grow in the various areas that they identify for themselves. It's not the mentor saying you need to write better or you need to communicate better. It's not that. The mentee already knows where there are some weaknesses in their skills and who can help them develop those areas. So I would say the IDP is to empower mentees to assess for themselves the areas they want to grow, the goals they want to accomplish, the strategies and the resources, and the mentor comes in and says, now here's where I can guide you. And if there's an area where the mentor is not as confident about their expertise, here's where I can connect you to people who do have those expertise.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. I want to switch gears just a little bit because you and I share a passion for multicultural mentoring. And, a question I get asked a lot, I would love to pose to you, Nuru, which is what happens when you have a mentor and a mentor and a mentee who are from different cultural contexts and they don't know how do you bridge that gap? What do you advise them?
Mm-hmm. I would say to really have an honest conversation about your culture. So for example, when I work with a student who, I'm originally from Madagascar, for those of you who don't know, but I was raised both in the US and the culture in my home country. So I came back and forth because I followed my father who is a theologian and a minister. And so I was raised in both the US culture and the Malagasy culture. But if I'm working with a student, say from India, for example, I would say, tell me about yourself. What kind of culture did you grow up in? And then, the student would talk about whatever that would be. And then one question that I always ask is, tell me more about your communication style.
Mm.
because communication is a key component to any relationship. And there are different types of communication styles. There's direct, which I've seen in the US. There tends to be a more direct way of communicating. There's indirect. Some people call it passive aggressive, but it's not passive aggressive, it's indirect way of communicating, not stating the obvious, but kind of stating it in a different way. And sometimes people say it's to preserve relationship with somebody. It's not to be very direct in how you communicate. There's a circular form of communication where you talk about something and you don't get to the point right away, but the point is made through the communication. And you hope that somebody gets the point along the way, but you're not going to point it. So there are ways that you can talk to somebody and ask, how do you communicate? How do you like to communicate, so that you don't misconceive what they're saying when it's just a difference of communication style, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have those honest conversations about what is it like for you to be in this environment. If you're in a predominantly white institution, for example, what is it like to be here, coming from a different culture? And being open to really listening to what the other one is saying, being open to differences. Part of the problem in academia is that, and I mentioned this to all of our faculty in the training that we do, is that we proudly say we want diversity. We're going to recruit diverse students. We're going to recruit diverse faculty. We want to diversify the professoriate and so on. But then we actually already have some expectations of what that diversity should be like. Mm. Right in our minds, we're kind of thinking like a diverse student should act like this, be like this, look like this, behave like this. So when the diversity comes into the door and they don't meet our expectation of what diversity should be, then that person has a problem coming into the host culture, because we already have envisioned what diversity should be like. I have graduate students coming to me saying, in tears, saying, I'm not the diversity my department expected. Mm. How do you even process that? How do you expect diversity? Diversity is diversity. You can't dictate it. Otherwise, it's not diversity, right? It's just our acceptable form of diversity. And that's hard. So when you're working across cultures in mentoring, the first thing is to have that honest conversation about each other's background, checking ourselves to make sure that we don't already have preconceived notions of how the other person should be behaving to meet our expectation of what a mentor or mentee should be. Mm-hmm. Right? So take out those implicit biases, check yourself to make sure you don't have them. I have to check myself all the time. It's very easy to say, well, I worked with an Indian student last year, and are you sure you're from India? Okay, there, wow. Yep.
Wow.
Yep, because you have expectations of how an Indian student should behave and communicate. Well, it depends on what part of India they grew up in, just the diversity within diversity, okay?
Right.
I have graduate students coming to me saying, why does my advisor keep asking me if I'm really from China? So there are expectations for that faculty of how Chinese students should behave. And the student said, maybe he keeps asking me that because I voice my opinion. I tell him very gently when I think he's wrong, and I think he's not used to having female Chinese students tell him he's wrong. Mm-hmm. Right? So, right. So I think having that self-reflection about how do I see the world, how do I see myself in it, and do I have biases around certain cultures, so that when I work with people from those cultures, I already have this preconceived notion of who they should be, mm-hmm. based on my experience with other people, that come from that similar culture. So understanding that individuals are individuals, nobody represents a race, or a culture, that everybody's different, because of their individual experiences.
Yeah, I think that's so, so, so key, both for mentor and for mentee. And, also, a lot of times people say, well, how do I know when I'm making an assumption or a generalization? And to me, I always say, check yourself at the point of irritation. I mean, start, right? But because a lot of times you'll say, why can't they just tell, why I'm so irritated that they haven't gotten to the point. Well, what's that irritation about? What's the assumption behind the irritation, right? What's the bias behind the irritation? And, but having the conversation up front, what I love about that is it becomes a trust building conversation as opposed to something that can erode trust later on. Which gets me to another question that I've been having actually a lot, because as we record this, it's the middle of June of 2020, where we're obviously having a lot more discussions about race and difference than as a society as a whole than we were several months ago. Is, this fear that talking about difference is something that will erode trust rather than to build trust. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts as to that, Noro, of terms of, there's a lot of people, particularly in a primarily white institution, right? Whether it's an academic institution or a corporate institution or anything else, that they don't want to make a mistake and have somebody either dislike them or not trust them or not think that they're good because by talking about difference. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I think we can't escape it. Difference is good. I don't know why we're afraid to talk about difference. Difference is what makes me and makes you Lisa. I don't want to be you, and you should not want to be me, right? Because then it defeats the purpose of individuals having unique experiences. And we're not and should not be out there trying to clone ourselves. And that's why we have problems by communicating across cultures, is because we don't want to see the difference in each other that enriches our experience to understand the human experience better. Okay, if we all thought the same way, we all approached science or what have you the same way, there wouldn't be any learning experience, because people are not the same. So that's why it's important that we diversify all aspects, all sectors of employment and education and learning, because the world is diverse, right? There isn't just one way to approach treatment. There isn't one way to approach research, because the world itself is diverse. So we need to talk about difference in a very proactive and positive manner, where we talk about why is difference important and valuable, right? Not why we should be afraid of difference, but how can different perspectives, different experiences better inform us as human beings about the diversity of human experience. So looking at a person, even though they are from the same country, so let's say two Americans, one from say New York and one from California, they have two very different cultures and upbringing personally and culturally, because they are from two different parts of the United States. You can't say these two people have the same experience. Same thing with someone who comes from China, different parts of China, different parts of Congo, whatever. So I think the important part is to look at differences as values, right? It's important to embrace it, talk about it, and work through them if you do have very differing opinions and contradicting values, okay? But the idea is not to let our differences separate us, but bring us closer by trying to understand the other one better. And so you don't have to have the other person's values, but you do have to know that that person has values. The way you do, the way you believe, your firm belief in your faith, your practices and so on, that person has the same commitment to their own. Doesn't mean yours is better or worse, it's just different. And then talking about that is the important step.
Yeah, we've done ourselves a disservice by having the saying that say we connect despite our differences. I'm on a mission to eradicate that saying, because I think with curiosity and with sort of this lack of judgment, we can connect because of our differences. You know,
Yeah.
we can, you know, I can be curious about your upbringing in Madagascar and what it's like to work at a multicultural university and all of these things, which are experiences that I don't have, and that can create connection and an understanding and enhance our relationship, as opposed to, oh, I don't know anything about that.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And what people would find at times that although they may on surface seem very different, people, different parts of the world, different experiences, that there are some things that might also tie them, that might connect them on just a basic human level. Maybe the love of a certain type of music, for example.
right.
I met a colleague, we didn't realize how much we both loved country music, you know, and so we connected at that level, and it was a great ice-breaking experience. Well, who's your favorite artist? You know, Dolly Parton, or, I mean, it was just a way to see that at the very core, we are humans. We love music, we love food, you know, we love, you know, watching movies, and you can connect on different levels and still see that we are humans, you know, at our core.
Yeah.
And yes, we're going to have differences, but those are, it's good to have them. I really would not want to run into somebody who is just like me. I think that would just be the most boring, you know,
100%. 100%.
conversation, you know, and even twins, you know, are different too, right?
Right.
So, so I really believe that our differences drive who we are as humans, and to be afraid of difference, I think is something that each of us, we have to work on that on our own, but to really think about how can I better contribute to the other person's experience by understanding them and then them understanding me.
Yeah. One of the reasons I love this in the mentoring context so much is because I think when you have that sort of intimate connection in a professional setting, right, you can talk about these differences, and it really is such a mutuality of learning and appreciation, and oftentimes with people who otherwise really would not interact and have that kind of understanding. So I know in my own mentoring experiences, when I've had mentoring relationships with people who are, well, I always have mentoring relationships with people who are different from me, because everybody's different from me in some way, but really exploring those and getting curious about them instead of stepping around them has always enhanced that relationship as well.
Absolutely.
This is such great work that you're doing. Any final words of wisdom, Nuru, for the folks who are watching this about any aspect of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I would just say to really focus on having a mutually positive and rewarding relationship for both the mentor and the mentee. To really think about mentoring as helping the mentee get over a period of discomfort. When we grow, we have that sense of discomfort because this is something new, this is something that is unfamiliar, and what a mentor does is help you through that discomfort period so that you can move on to the next step of your professional or academic growth. So if you think about it in that way, anything that we haven't tried will be uneasy, right, at first. Anything that, so I ask my students, have you ever written a dissertation? No. Well, that's why this is uncomfortable for you, because you haven't done this before. So how are you supposed to know what this process looks like? But that's why you have an advisor. That's why you have mentors to see you through that process. So the role of the mentor is to help mentees get over that phase of discomfort in doing something new, learning something new. The mentee should not be uncomfortable with discomfort. It comes with growth. If you're not uncomfortable with something, you're not growing. Okay, so we should, as mentees, we should look at that like, am I too comfortable? If I'm too comfortable with something, where you are in your professional career or academic progress, then it might mean you're not really growing because everything just comes too easy and you're basically looking for the next step. So when you're uncomfortable, when you sense discomfort, it's because you are growing. And it's the same thing with the conversation about difference. Okay, when we are uncomfortable with a conversation with someone, it's because we need to grow. We're being challenged. We need to challenge our own biases, and it's uncomfortable. right? So we shouldn't really feel bad about being uncomfortable, because that could also be a sign of growth.
Yeah, beautiful. Wonderful. Well, Dr. Noro Andramanalia, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. If folks want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Andri002@umn.edu. So ANDRI002@umn.edu.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.